What happens when entitlement meets ultimate authority? At 30,000 feet, a woman dripping in designer brands boards a flight and sees a black woman settled comfortably in the most coveted first-class seat. Convinced it's a mistake, a diversity handout, or something worse, she unleashes a tirade of public humiliation. She demands the woman be moved, refusing to believe she belongs. But she picked the wrong woman on the wrong flight. Because that quiet, elegant woman isn't just another passenger. She's the visionary founder and owner of the entire airline. And she's about to teach a lesson in humility that will create turbulence felt across the globe. The air in the first-class cabin of Aura Airlines Flight 710, from New York's JFK to London Heathrow, was a carefully curated symphony of tranquility. The scent was a bespoke blend of white tea and cedar. The lighting was a soft ambient gold, and the gentle hum of the Rolls-Royce engines on the Airbus A350 was a promise of a smooth 7-hour journey across the Atlantic. In seat 1A, Seraphina Sterling looked out the window, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. For her, this was more than just a flight. It was a pilgrimage. This was the flagship route of the airline she had built from scratch, a testament to a dream everyone told her was impossible. At 48, Seraphina carried an aura of quiet power. Her hair was styled in elegant, intricate braids that cascaded over the shoulder of her tailored navy blue blazer. She wore no overt jewelry, save for a simple, classic watch on her wrist and the plain gold band on her finger that was a tribute to her late husband, the man who had believed in her when no one else did. She was flying under a different name today. Grace Mbeki, a standard practice for her quarterly undercover boss-style reviews of her own company. It was her way of ensuring the aura experience wasn't just a marketing slogan, but a reality for every passenger, regardless of who was watching. The last of the first-class passengers began to trickle in. A young tech CEO was already engrossed in his laptop in 2K, and a famous actress was hidden behind oversized sunglasses and a magazine in 3A. Then Carol Peterson arrived. Carol moved not like a person boarding a plane, but like a queen surveying a newly conquered territory. Her platinum blonde hair was shellacked into a perfect helmet, her face a mask of expensive foundation, and her body was a canvas for the latest Gucci collection. Behind her trailed her husband, Mark, a man whose expensive suit seemed to wear him rather than the other way around. He had a perpetually harried look, his eyes darting around as if constantly assessing for threats or opportunities. Carol's ticket was for 1B, the seat directly adjacent to Seraphina. Her eyes cold and assessing swept over the cabin before landing on Seraphina. There was a flicker of something disbelief, then annoyance that was almost imperceptible. She stopped short, causing Mark to nearly bump into her. "Excuse me," Carol said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the cabin's serene ambiance. She wasn't speaking to Seraphina, but to a young flight attendant named Ben Carter, who was helping another passenger nearby. Ben, barely 25, but with a preternatural calm, turned with a practiced warm smile. "Yes, ma'am." "Welcome aboard." "Can I help you?" Carol gestured vaguely towards Seraphina with a perfectly manicured hand. "I think there's been a mistake. You've sat someone in my companion's seat." She looked at her boarding pass, then back at Seraphina, as if comparing a price tag to a faulty product. "My husband and I are in 1B and 1A. Ben's smile didn't falter, but his eyes held a careful neutrality. He had seen this specific brand of passive aggression before. "I can assure you the seating chart is correct, ma'am. Seat 1A is assigned to Miss Mbeki." He glanced at Seraphina with a respectful nod. "And you and your husband are in 1B and 2B. Carol's perfectly painted lips tightened. "No, that can't be right. I paid for 2 seats together." The best seats. The implication hung heavy in the air that the person in the best seat did not fit her image of who belonged there. Seraphina, who had been observing the exchange, finally turned from the window. She offered a polite, small smile. There might have been a last-minute equipment change. Sometimes that scrambles the seating. "I'm sure we can sort it out." Her voice was calm and melodic, carrying a natural authority that seemed to momentarily disarm Carol. But the moment was fleeting. Carol looked Seraphina up and down, her gaze lingering on the simple blazer and lack of flashy designer logos. Her mind, a finely tuned machine of prejudice and classism, had already run its calculations and arrived at a conclusion. "Well, perhaps, Carol," said her tone dripping with condescension, "you'd be more comfortable in one of the other seats. My husband needs to be next to me to work. He's a very important lawyer." Mark shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with everyone. "Carol, it's fine. I can sit behind you." "It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal, Mark," she snapped, turning on him. "We paid for a service. We paid for these specific seats." She turned her venom back to Ben. "Young man, I insist you fix this. Move her." The word "her" was delivered with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Ben's training kicked in. De-escalate. Offer solutions. Stay polite. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but seat 1A is occupied. The passenger is settled. I cannot ask her to move. The first-class cabin is completely full, but I can see if there are other options." Before he could finish, Carol cut him off. "I don't want other options, I want that seat." How did she even get it? Did you give it away as some kind of affirmative action upgrade? Is that the new policy? Punish paying customers to fill a quota. The cabin, which had been a low hum of private conversations and rustling papers, fell silent. Every eye was now on the unfolding drama in the front row. The actress lowered her magazine. The tech CEO paused his typing. This was no longer a simple seating dispute. It was a public spectacle. Seraphina's smile had vanished, replaced by a look of profound disappointment. She had seen ugliness in boardrooms, faced down sexism and racism from venture capitalists and competitors for decades. But to see it here in the cabin of her own plane, directed so venomously at a passenger who happened to be her, felt like a personal failure. Her airline was meant to be a sanctuary of civility and respect. This woman was poisoning the air. "Ma'am Seraphina," said her voice still even, but now laced with a cold firmness that made Mark flinch. "There is no need for that kind of language. We are all passengers on this flight, and we are all entitled to be treated with basic decency." Carol let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Decency? Don't you talk to me about decency. You're the one who is refusing to move from a seat you probably didn't even pay for. People like you are always looking for a handout." The accusation, so baseless and vile, hung in the air. Ben's face had gone pale. He knew he was losing control of the situation. He pressed the call button on his wrist device to discreetly summon the head purser, Margaret Hayes. Mark finally found his voice a weak, placating whisper. "Carol, please just drop it. Sit down. You're making a scene. I'll make a scene when I'm not getting what I paid thousands of dollars for," she retorted, her voice rising in pitch. She jabbed a finger in Seraphina's direction. "I want to know how she got this ticket. I want to see her boarding pass. I bet it says, 'Stand by,' or employee guest. I will not sit here while the paying customers are being displaced by charity cases. The spark had been lit. Now the inferno was about to begin. The arrival of Margaret Hayes, the flight's purser, was a subtle shift in the cabin's dynamic. With over 30 years of experience, Margaret had a presence that commanded respect without a single word. Her salt and pepper hair was in a neat chignon, and her uniform was immaculate. She assessed the situation with a glance, Ben looking stressed but professional. Carol Peterson red-faced and practically vibrating with indignation. Mark Peterson looking like he wished the floor would swallow him whole. And the woman in 1A, who met Margaret's eyes with a look of calm, weary resignation. "Good evening," Margaret said, her voice a soothing alto. "Is there a problem here I can help resolve?" Carol immediately rounded on her. Finally, someone with some authority. "This woman," she said, spitting the word out, "is in my husband's seat, and your employee here refuses to do anything about it. I've paid nearly $20,000 for these tickets, and I expect a certain level of service." Margaret's eyes flickered to her tablet, quickly pulling up the flight manifest. "I see you and Mr. Peterson are in 1B and 2B, and Ms. Mbeki is in 1A. The seating arrangement is correct according to our system." "Your system is wrong," Carol insisted, or she scammed her way into the seat. "Look at her. Does she look like she can afford a first-class ticket on this airline?" The question was so overtly racist, so dripping with prejudice, that a collective gasp went through the nearby passengers. Someone in row 3 muttered, "Oh my God," loud enough for everyone to hear. A young man across the aisle had his phone angled just so the red dot of its recording function, a silent, damning witness. Seraphina had heard enough. She slowly, deliberately unbuckled her seatbelt. She didn't stand, but the simple act of sitting up straighter seemed to draw all the energy in the cabin toward her. "My financial status," Seraphina began, her voice dangerously quiet, "is not your concern, nor is the color of my skin. You have been told multiple times that this is my assigned seat. Your refusal to accept that fact is now delaying this flight and causing a disturbance for every other passenger on this aircraft. How dare you?" Carol shrieked. "You're the one causing the disturbance by refusing to move." She turned to Margaret again. "I am a Diamond Medallion member. I have flown millions of miles. I know my rights. If you don't remove her, I will call my husband's law firm, Peterson & Shaw, and I will sue this entire airline for discrimination against a paying customer." Mark's face went ashen at the mention of his firm. He grabbed his wife's arm. "Carol, for God's sake, stop! You're going too far." She shook him off violently. "Don't touch me, Mark. You're just as useless as they are. Why won't you stand up for me?" The confrontation had reached a point of no return. It was no longer about a seat. It was a raw, ugly display of entitlement and bigotry. Ben, feeling emboldened by Margaret's presence, stepped forward slightly. "Ma'am," Ben said to Carol, his voice firm, "you are violating the airline's code of conduct. Your language is abusive and discriminatory. I am asking you one last time to please take your assigned seat. If you refuse, we will have to deplane you." Carol's eyes bulged. "You're threatening me. You're threatening me. Unbelievable. I want your name. I'm going to have your job. I'm going to have all of your jobs. I want to speak to the captain. Right now." Margaret knew this was the final escalation point. A request to speak to the captain was serious. She nodded curtly to Ben, who made his way to the flight deck. The entire cabin was now a pressure cooker of tension. The man with the phone was still recording. The actress had taken off her sunglasses, her expression one of utter disbelief. Seraphina watched the scene, her heart heavy. This was the exact scenario they had wargamed in training sessions. A code-red passenger, disruptive, abusive, and non-compliant. The protocol was clear, but watching it play out, being the target of the vitriol, was different. She saw the stress on Ben's face, the steely professionalism of Margaret, the spinelessness of Mark, and the pure, unadulterated hatred in Carol's eyes. She had designed Aura Airlines to be a symbol of progress, of elegance, and inclusivity, and this woman was trying to tear it down from the inside, one hateful word at a time. A moment later, the cockpit door opened. Captain David Evans, a tall, distinguished man with silvering hair, stepped into the cabin. He exuded an air of absolute command. His eyes scanned the scene immediately, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Evans," he said, addressing Carol directly. "I understand there's an issue with your seating." Carol launched into her tirade again, replaying the entire incident with dramatic embellishments, painting herself as the victim of a grand conspiracy by the airline to give her seat away. And this employee threatened to have me removed. A loyal customer. Captain Evans listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When she finally wound down, he didn't even look at his manifest. He turned his head slightly and looked at the woman in seat 1A. His entire demeanor changed. The stern, commanding presence softened into one of genuine warm respect. A smile broke across his face. "Seraphina," he said, his voice full of surprise and pleasure. "What on earth are you doing on my flight? I thought you were in Singapore this week." The use of her first name, so familiar and easy, was the first crack in Carol Peterson's armor of outrage. She stared at the captain, then at Seraphina, her mouth slightly agape. Seraphina finally allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Dave, good to see you. I had to reroute. I was hoping for a quiet flight to check in on the London crew." The entire cabin held its breath. The pieces were starting to click into place for the other passengers. The familiar way the captain spoke to her, her incredible poise under pressure, her mention of the London crew. But for Carol, the puzzle was still a jumble of nonsensical parts. "You know her?" she asked the captain, her voice a confused squeak. Captain Evans turned back to Carol, his professional mask back in place, but now it was edged with ice. "Know her, ma'am. I've been flying with this airline for 15 years. I was one of the first pilots she hired." He paused for dramatic effect, letting his words sink in. He then gestured towards the woman, who had endured minutes of vile abuse. "Ma'am, this isn't Ms. Mbeki. This is Miss Seraphina Sterling. She's the founder and CEO of Aura Airlines." A profound, echoing silence fell over the first-class cabin. If a pin had dropped, it would have sounded like a thunderclap. The name Sterling hung in the air, connecting instantly and irrevocably to the gold cursive logo on the bulkheads, the napkins, and the tail of the very plane they were sitting on. Aura Airlines by Sterling. Carol Peterson's face went through a rapid theatrical series of transformations. First, utter confusion as her brain tried to process the captain's words. Then a dawning, sickening comprehension that contorted her features. Her jaw went slack. The fiery rage in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by the glassy, panicked look of a cornered animal. The color drained from her face, leaving her expensive foundation looking like a chalky mask. She stared at Seraphina, truly seeing her for the first time. She wasn't seeing a charity case or a quota. She was seeing the woman whose face was on the cover of Forbes and Fortune, the trailblazing entrepreneur who had shattered glass ceilings in the aviation industry, a celebrated figure in global business. She was seeing power, and she had just spent the last 10 minutes spitting in its face. Across the aisle, the man with the phone slowly lowered it, a look of stunned awe on his face. The actress whispered "Holy" to her assistant. Every passenger was a witness to a moment of karmic whiplash, so sudden and so complete, it felt scripted. In the eye of this hurricane of realization, Seraphina remained preternaturally calm. She looked at Carol not with triumph or anger, but with a deep, penetrating disappointment. It was the look of a creator seeing her creation being misused in the worst possible way. Miss Peterson Seraphina said, her voice even and clear, cutting through the silence. "You asked how I got this seat. I got it because it, like every other seat on this aircraft, belongs to me. You invoked your status as a loyal customer. Well, I have a duty to all my customers. A duty to ensure their safety and comfort. A duty to protect them from the kind of behavior you have exhibited here tonight." Mark Peterson looked like he was having a heart attack. He grabbed his wife's arm again, this time with a desperate strength. "Carol, apologize. Right now, apologize to her." But Carol was frozen, her mind short-circuiting. The gears of her world-view, where wealth and whiteness gave her absolute authority, were grinding to a halt against the immovable object of reality. Seraphina turned her attention from Carol to the crew. Her voice softened, but the steel underneath remained. "Captain Evans. Thank you. Margaret. Ben. Your conduct was exemplary under extreme provocation. You followed protocol perfectly. I want to personally commend you both." Ben, who had been standing rigidly by, felt a wave of relief so intense his knees almost buckled. Margaret gave a slight, respectful dip of her head. "Thank you, Miss Sterling." Seraphina then looked at Captain Evans. "Dave, I'm afraid this flight cannot continue with the Petersons on board. They represent a clear and present threat to the civility and order of this cabin. Please return to the gate." "Right away, Ms. Sterling," the captain replied, without a moment's hesitation. He turned to Margaret. "Purser, please coordinate with ground security. Have them meet us at the jet bridge." The finality of the order finally snapped Carol out of her stupor. The panic morphed back into a twisted, desperate form of her earlier rage. "No. You can't do this. I will not be thrown off this plane. I'm the victim here. I was confused." "You were not confused, Ms. Peterson," Seraphina stated coolly. "You were hateful. There's a difference." Mark began to plead, his voice cracking. "Please, Miss Sterling, we are so sorry. My wife, she's had a stressful week. She didn't mean it. We'll sit down. We'll be quiet. Please don't do this. My career, our reputation." Seraphina's gaze shifted to him, and for the first time it was filled with utter contempt. "Your reputation." You stood there in silence while your wife racially abused another human being. You allowed her to berate my staff. Your cowardice is in many ways more offensive than her bigotry. You are complicit in every hateful word she uttered. You are not a victim here, Mr. Peterson. You are an enabler. You both have to leave." Her judgment was absolute. There was no appeal. As the captain went back to the cockpit, the soft chime sounded, and he made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. I do apologize, but we will be returning to the gate due to a security issue on board. We will provide you with more information shortly. Cabin crew prepare for arrival." The engines, which had been spooled up for takeoff, whined down. The plane began a slow, lumbering turn back towards the terminal. For the Petersons, it was the beginning of the longest walk of shame of their lives. Carol started to weep, not with remorse, but with the self-pity of a bully who had finally been punched back. "This is not fair," she sobbed as Margaret and Ben stood by, waiting to escort them. "My life is ruined." Mark just stared into space, the full, catastrophic weight of what had just happened finally crashing down upon him. He thought of his partners at the firm. He thought of the viral video that was almost certainly about to surface. He thought of the name Peterson and Shaw being dragged through the mud. His wife hadn't just gotten them kicked off a flight. She had detonated a nuclear bomb in the center of their carefully constructed lives. As the plane docked with the jet bridge, 2 uniformed Port Authority officers and an Airline's ground manager appeared at the door. The sight of them, stoic and official, was the final, undeniable proof that this was real. This was happening. Seraphina Sterling watched them go, her expression unreadable. She felt no joy, no sense of victory, only a profound sadness. This incident wasn't just about one racist woman on one flight. It was a symptom of a sickness she had fought against her entire life. And now it had shown up in her own home. She knew with chilling certainty that this was far from over. The eruption was finished. The fallout was about to begin. The walk from seat 1B to the aircraft door was a gauntlet of silent judgment. Every eye in the first and business class cabins was fixed on Carol and Mark Peterson. The atmosphere was thick with a mixture of shock, disgust, and a kind of grim satisfaction. The whispers started as they passed, quiet but cutting. "That's what you get. Did you hear what she said? I can't believe the nerve." Carol, her face streaked with tears, and mascara tried to maintain a shred of dignity, holding her head high, but the effect was ruined by the panicked, hunted look in her eyes. Mark was completely broken, his shoulders slumped in defeat, his gaze fixed on the plush carpet, as if it held the answers to how his life had so spectacularly imploded in the span of 15 minutes. At the aircraft door, Margaret Hayes stood beside the ground manager, a crisp professional named Evelyn. The 2 Port Authority officers waited impassively on the jet bridge. "Mr. and Mrs. Peterson," Evelyn said, her tone polite but firm. "I am the duty manager for Airlines. I'm here to escort you back to the terminal. Your luggage will be offloaded and brought to you in the baggage claim area. Your ticket will be cancelled and you will be issued a refund for the remaining portion of your journey." "Cancelled?" Carol screeched, finding a last reserve of indignation. "You're stranding us in London." "You are currently in New York, ma'am." Evelyn corrected her gently. "And you are not being stranded. You are being denied travel on Airlines. You will be placed on our permanent no-fly list due to your violation of crew member instructions and your abusive behavior towards staff and another passenger. A permanent ban." The words hit Carol like a physical blow. Aura was the premier airline for transatlantic business. This was more than an inconvenience. It was a social and professional amputation. Mark, seemingly zombified, just nodded and allowed himself to be guided onto the jet bridge. Carol, however, made one last stand. She turned back and looked directly at Seraphina, who was still in her seat, watching the proceedings with a detached calm. "You'll regret this," Carol yelled, her voice echoing in the now cavernous silence of the cabin. "You think you're so powerful. I'll tell everyone what you did. I will destroy your airline." Seraphina didn't even flinch. She simply held Carol's gaze until the belligerent woman, finding no purchase, finally turned and stumbled off the plane. her hollow threats swallowed by the hum of the airport. As soon as the door was closed, a palpable sense of relief washed over the cabin. It was as if a toxic presence had been cleansed. Then something remarkable happened. Spontaneously, a passenger in row 4 started to applaud. Then another joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire first-class cabin was giving a standing ovation not for the drama, but for the quiet, decisive authority with which it had been handled. They were applauding Seraphina. A faint blush rose on Seraphina's cheeks, and she gave a small, appreciative nod. She was not comfortable being the center of attention, but she understood the sentiment. They were celebrating the restoration of order and decency. Captain Evans's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the entire crew, I want to extend my sincerest apologies for the delay and the unpleasantness. We appreciate your patience. We have been cleared for departure once more. Please remain in your seats as we prepare to get underway." The crew, galvanized by the incident, moved with renewed purpose. Ben, his earlier anxiety replaced with a quiet confidence, approached Seraphina's seat. "Miss Sterling," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. I just wanted to say thank you. I've never seen a situation like that, handled so definitively. Most of the time, we're told to just absorb the abuse." Seraphina looked up at him, her expression warm. "Ben, you did everything right. You were professional and patient, long past the point of reason. My airline is only as good as the people who represent it, and tonight you represented it with honor. I won't forget it." She made a mental note. Ben Carter. Track for leadership program. Margaret approached next. "Ms. Sterling, the ground manager, has them. They're being escorted to the landside area. The Port Authority officers are taking their statements." "Good," Seraphina said. "Margaret, please compile a full incident report and pull the files on every complaint ever lodged by Carol or Mark Peterson on our airline. I have a feeling this isn't the first time they've been problematic." "Already on it," Margaret confirmed with a knowing look. As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, for the second time, Seraphina allowed herself to relax. But she knew the in-flight drama was only Act 1. The real storm would begin when the video hit the internet. She glanced over at the young man in 3K, the one who had been recording. He met her gaze and gave a hesitant, apologetic shrug, as if to say, "The world needs to see this." Seraphina simply nodded in understanding. She had spent her life controlling the narrative of her company. Now, for better or worse, the narrative was in the hands of the internet. All she could do was brace for the turbulence she knew was coming. The reveal was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. By the time Aura Flight 710 was halfway across the Atlantic, the video was already spreading like wildfire. The passenger in 3K, a social media influencer named Leo Reyes, with over 2 million followers, had waited until the plane reached cruising altitude and he could connect to the Wi-Fi. He had edited the footage, a gripping 2-minute clip that captured the ugliest parts of Carol's tirade, the captain's stunning reveal, and the Petersons' walk of shame, and posted it with a simple caption: "This is what happens when you pick on the wrong woman in first class. Match Aura Airlines. Karens off the sky. Instant karma." The internet did the rest. The video was a perfect storm of viral content. It had a clear villain, a sympathetic and powerful hero, a dramatic plot twist, and a satisfying karmic conclusion. Within an hour, it had 1 million views. By the time Seraphina landed in London, it was the #1 trending topic worldwide. News outlets smelling blood in the water scrambled to identify the couple. It didn't take long. Amateur sleuths on Reddit and Twitter cross-referenced Carroll's mention of Peterson and Shaw with the grainy footage. Within hours, the full names were Public Carroll and Mark Peterson of Greenwich, Connecticut. Their photos, social media profiles, and the address of their multi-million-dollar home were being shared across every platform. The official social media channels for Aura Airlines were flooded with messages of support. People praised the airline for its decisive action, for protecting its staff, and for standing up to a racist bully. The company's stock, which had been trading flat, saw a surprising pre-market bump. Seraphina's personal story was retold in countless articles. The orphan who became a titan of industry, the black woman who conquered a field dominated by white men. Overnight, she became a folk hero. But while Seraphina and her airline were being celebrated, a very different storm was breaking over Peterson and Shaw. The law firm, founded by Mark's grandfather, was a bastion of old money East Coast prestige. They had recently spent millions on a corporate rebranding campaign, emphasizing their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. They had sponsored scholarships for underprivileged students and had partners sitting on the boards of multiple civil rights charities. The video of one of their senior partners standing by silently while his wife spewed racist venom was a direct missile strike on their carefully crafted public image. The firm's managing partner, a formidable man named Robert Shaw, was awakened by a call from their head of PR at 3 a.m. He watched the video, once his face growing grimmer with each passing second. He watched it a second time, focusing on Mark's weak, ineffectual presence. By the time it finished, he had made his decision. He called an emergency meeting of the other equity partners for 7 a.m. The mood in the mahogany-paneled boardroom was funereal. The video was projected onto a large screen, playing on a silent loop. The shame and fury in the room were palpable. "He's a disgrace," said a partner named Maria Sanchez, the first Latina to make partner at the firm. He stood there and said nothing. He let his wife invoke the name of this firm while she was terrorizing that poor woman and the crew. "The client calls have already started," the head of PR reported, his voice strained. "3 of our biggest corporate accounts, the ones we just signed after our DEI push, are asking for an explanation. The hashtag #BoycottPeterson and Shaw is trending right behind the original video." Robert Shaw stood at the head of the table, his face like surmount. "This is not just a PR crisis. This is a moral crisis. Mark's complicity has made us all look like hypocrites." His silence was an endorsement. It has undone 20 years of work in a single night. There was no debate. There was no discussion of second chances. The verdict was unanimous and swift. They weren't just protecting the firm. They were cleansing it. When Mark Peterson finally landed at Heathrow, having been forced to book last-minute tickets on a different, far less glamorous airline, his phone lit up with hundreds of notifications. The first one he saw was an email from Robert Shaw. The subject line was stark urgent. He opened it, his hands trembling. It was a short, brutally professional letter. It informed him that pending a formal vote required by the partnership agreement, he was being placed on indefinite unpaid leave. He was instructed not to contact any clients, not to speak to the press, and to have no contact with any employee of the firm. It was, for all intents and purposes, a termination. His access to his work accounts had already been revoked. He felt the world tilt on its axis. He looked over at Carol, who was on her own phone, reading the torrent of hateful comments and news articles about herself. Her face was a mess of tear-tracked makeup and disbelief. "They're calling me Airplane Karen," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They've posted our address. There are pictures of our house." Mark couldn't even summon the energy to be angry with her. He was hollowed out, filled with a terrifying, empty dread. He had just lost his career, his reputation, and the legacy his family had built over generations, and he knew deep down that he had no one to blame but himself. His wife had lit the match, but he had stood by and watched the fire burn. The viral storm had made landfall, and it was tearing their lives apart, piece by piece. The days that followed were a blur of humiliation for the Petersons. They were trapped in a London hotel, virtual prisoners of their own infamy. The British tabloids had picked up the story, and paparazzi were camped outside their hotel. Every time they tried to step out, they were met with a barrage of camera flashes and shouted questions. The relationship between Mark and Carol, already strained by years of her domineering personality, and his passive compliance, completely fractured under the pressure. The silence between them in their $1,000-a-night suite was heavier and more toxic than any argument. "This is all your fault," Mark finally said, one evening breaking a 6-hour silence. He was staring at his laptop, where his firm had just released a public statement. It was a masterpiece of corporate damage control, condemning his and his wife's actions in the strongest possible terms and highlighting their swift, decisive move to suspend him. They had thrown him to the wolves without a second thought. Carol, who had been aimlessly scrolling through hate mail, looked up, her eyes flashing with defiance. My fault. You were the one who was supposed to have my back. You just stood there like a coward. While that woman and the whole plane ganged up on me." "Ganged up on you?" Mark's voice rose, cracking with a hysteria he had never shown before. "You were racially abusing a woman." "Carol, you were screaming at airline staff. You brought up my law firm as a threat. What did you want me to do? Join in? Congratulate you on your bigotry? I wanted you to be my husband," she shrieked. "To defend me." "There was nothing to defend," he roared back, finally unleashing decades of suppressed resentment. "It was just you being your usual entitled, nasty self. But this time, you did it in public on camera, and you aimed it at one of the most powerful women in the world. You didn't just embarrass yourself, Carol. You incinerated my life. My career is over. My name is mud. We're a national laughingstock." The fight devolved from there, a toxic spew of accusations and long-buried grievances. It was ugly, raw, and final. By the end of it, they both knew their marriage was as dead as Mark's career. Back in the US, Carol's social life had been similarly nuked. The Greenwich Country Club, where she was the queen bee of the tennis committee, had summarily revoked her membership. The charity boards she sat on had politely but firmly asked for her resignation. Her friends, the wealthy wives she lunched with, were no longer taking her calls. She had been excised from their world with surgical precision. Desperate to salvage her reputation, Carol made a catastrophic decision. Against the advice of the one crisis PR firm that would even take her call, she agreed to do a live television interview. She chose a popular morning talk show, hoping to present herself as a misunderstood victim. It was a disaster of epic proportions. Under the gentle but probing questions of the host, Carol's carefully rehearsed apology crumbled. She talked about her stress, about the confusion of the seating, about feeling threatened. She never once took full responsibility for the racist nature of her comments. The crucial moment came when the host asked, "Do you now believe that Ms. Sterling, a black woman, had every right to be in that seat?" Carol hesitated. A flicker of her old arrogance returned. Well, I believe everyone has a right to be where they have paid to be, of course. It was just unusual. That one word, unusual, was all it took. The public saw it not as an apology, but as a confirmation of her prejudice. The hashtag #unusual trended for hours. Her disastrous interview was clipped and memed into oblivion. She hadn't just failed to put out the fire, she had poured gasoline on it. Fueled by public ridicule and a complete lack of self-awareness, Carol made her final fatal mistake. She hired a notoriously aggressive lawyer and filed a lawsuit against Aura Airlines. The suit alleged defamation, emotional distress, and wrongful removal from the flight. She was seeking $50 million in damages. The news was met with universal derision. Legal experts called it frivolous and predicted it would be dismissed immediately. But Seraphina Sterling saw it differently. In her New York office, surrounded by her legal team, Seraphina read the lawsuit with a grim smile. "She thinks this is a weapon against us," she told her lawyers. "She doesn't realize she just handed us a shield and a sword. This lawsuit opens her up to the discovery process. I want you to find everything, every complaint she's ever filed, every nasty email she's ever sent, every former employee she's ever mistreated. Her friend, the lawyer, wants to talk about character. Fine. Let's talk about character." The lawsuit wasn't an attack on Aura Airlines. It was Carol Peterson's formal invitation to her own public dissection, and Seraphina Sterling was more than willing to accept. The lawsuit Peterson v. Aura Airlines was Carol's declaration of war, but she had severely misjudged her enemy. She imagined a soulless corporation that would offer a quick, quiet settlement to avoid bad press. She did not account for Seraphina Sterling, a woman who treated an attack on her company's integrity as a deeply personal affront. Seraphina didn't want a settlement. She wanted a reckoning. She unleashed her legal team, not as negotiators, but as hunters. The discovery process became a systematic excavation of Carol Peterson's life, and what they unearthed was a pattern of behavior so consistent it was practically a signature. They deposed Maria, a former housekeeper Carol had fired. On the stand, the woman tearfully recounted how Carol had dismissed her on the spot for speaking Spanish to her sick child during a 5-minute phone call, calling the language a peasant's tongue that had no place in her home. They subpoenaed security footage from a high-end Chicago hotel where Carol had created a scene accusing a young black bellhop of stealing her diamond bracelet. The footage clearly showed her taking the bracelet off and placing it in her own coat pocket minutes before her tirade began. A quiet cash settlement had made the incident disappear until now. Seraphina's lawyers compiled a dossier of dozens of scathing emails Carol had sent over the years to everyone from florists to yacht club managers, each one dripping with condescension and threats. Paired with Margaret Hayes's meticulously documented report of 4 prior incidents of verbal abuse towards Aura Airlines flight crews, the evidence was overwhelming. It painted a portrait not of a woman who had one bad day, but of a person who moved through the world, leaving a wake of casual cruelty. The pre-trial hearing for dismissal was held in a federal courthouse in New York. Carol arrived dressed in a defiant white suit, her expression one of righteous indignation. She truly believed she was the wronged party. Seraphina sat in the gallery, a quiet observer, her presence a silent testament to the gravity of the proceedings. Aura's lead counsel, a sharp-witted lawyer named Julia Romano, didn't raise her voice once. She simply presented the evidence item by damning item building an unshakable case. "Your Honor, Julia concluded this lawsuit is not a quest for justice. It is an act of retaliation. It is an attempt by the plaintiff to monetize her own bigotry and to punish a company and a woman for refusing to tolerate it. It is, in short, an abuse of the very legal system she now seeks to exploit. The judge, a venerable man with a reputation for zero tolerance for frivolous litigation, looked over his glasses at Carol. He had seen the video. He had read the depositions. He took a long, deliberate breath before speaking. "Ms. Peterson," he began, his voice a low rumble of authority that filled the courtroom. "In all my years on this bench, I have rarely seen a case so devoid of merit. You come to this court seeking damages for emotional distress, yet the evidence overwhelmingly shows that you were the sole purveyor of distress on Aura Flight 710. You claim defamation, yet the only character that has been defamed is your own, by your own words and actions." He picked up a sheaf of papers. "Therefore, I am dismissing this lawsuit with prejudice, and I will be filing a motion to have you sanctioned for filing a claim so patently frivolous. You will not waste this court's time any further." The gavel fell with a crack of finality. Carol's face went white. She had lost, humiliatingly, publicly. But Seraphina was not done. The dismissal was a defense. Now it was temple for an offense. Her team immediately filed a countersuit against both Carol and Mark Peterson. This wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. The suit sought damages for the tangible costs of the disruption, the $8,000 in additional fuel burned by returning to the gate, the $11,000 in mandatory overtime paid to the ground crew, the $50,000 in travel vouchers issued to the other first-class passengers as an apology, and the significant federal offense of interfering with a flight crew in the performance of their duties. The countersuit was the final nail in the coffin of the Petersons' life together. Mark, facing a brutal ethics review by the State Bar Association, knew he was finished. Stripped of his career and legacy, he saw Carol not as a wife, but as the architect of his ruin. The divorce was swift and bitter. He sold their magnificent Greenwich home to cover his mounting legal fees and settle the division of assets, eventually taking a low-level paralegal job in a city where no one knew his name. He was a man hollowed out by his own complicity. Carol, however, remained pathologically defiant. After her lawyer quit, citing her refusal to listen to reason, she chose to represent herself in the countersuit trial. Her performance was a train wreck in slow motion. She tried to cross-examine Captain Evans, who calmly recited FAA regulations she had violated. She tried to portray Ben Carter as an aggressive employee, but he came across as a consummate professional. Her attempts to paint Seraphina Sterling as a corporate bully backfired spectacularly, making her look delusional. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. The court found in favor of Aura Airlines on all counts. Carol was ordered to pay the full $250,000 in damages. The judge also granted a permanent injunction, a legally binding order that barred her for life from coming within 500 feet of any Aura Airlines property, from its planes and ticket counters to its corporate headquarters. 2 years after that fateful flight, the world looked very different. Seraphina Sterling leveraged the global media attention to launch the Fly with Dignity Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to advocating for stronger legal protections for airline workers and establishing new industry standards for handling abusive passengers. At the foundation's launch gala, she stood at a podium and said, "This began with one ugly incident, but it has become a movement to ensure that the skies remain civil for everyone." In the front row, Ben Carter, now the youngest ever director of in-flight services for Aura's North American routes, watched his mentor with pride. Carol Peterson, after liquidating her remaining assets to pay the judgment, disappeared. Rumors circulated that she had moved to a small rented condo in Florida, living in an anonymous exile fueled by bitterness and regret. She became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered at the country clubs that had long since cast her out. On a cool autumn evening, Seraphina found herself once again on the red-eye from JFK to London, seated in 1A. As the plane climbed into the vast, dark sky, she looked out the window. She felt no lingering anger, no sense of triumph. Instead, she felt a profound sense of purpose. The incident had taught her that building a billion-dollar airline was only half the battle. The other half was building a culture, a small flying sanctuary of respect that could stand firm against the storms of hatred below. Her legacy wouldn't just be measured in profit margins or fleet size, but in the quiet, unassailable dignity she demanded for her people and her passengers, 30,000 feet above a world that was still learning how to be kind. And there you have it, a story that shows how quickly a life built on arrogance can crumble when it meets unshakable integrity. Carol Peterson thought her money and privilege made her untouchable, but she learned a hard lesson. True power isn't about looking down on others. It's about lifting them up. Seraphina Sterling didn't just win a confrontation. She used it to spark a positive change, reminding us all that the best response to hate is not more hate, but decisive, meaningful action. This story is a powerful reminder that our actions have consequences, and that the character we show in public is a direct reflection of who we are in private. What did you think of Carol's karma? Was it deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of drama and justice, please hit that like button. Share this video with your friends and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening.